Welcome to the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Serenitas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Amaral. Tyler, how are you this evening?
I'm doing good, John. I can't believe that we're already starting the postseason in one of the six New England states.
Yeah, it's crazy. Vermont kicks off their postseason this weekend. They generally get done a couple weeks before Thanksgiving, but I mean it's week 8 already around here, and it's hard to believe that the regular season wraps up next weekend, and 2 weeks from tomorrow night tomorrow night, 2 weeks from tomorrow night you're gonna be kicking off the postseason. So that that's just crazy to me. It's just amazing how quickly the fall does fly by. Now, before we do get started here, I do want to, and I just have to pull up the heads, or I do apologize. Um, I do want to remind you that if you are looking to fundraise and you need a good fundraiser that fits with your program in your community, well, then Gold Athletics has that fundraiser for you. Visit goldathletics.com today for more information. Matt Ross and his team have the experience and the know-how that you need to fundraise effectively and make money for your program. Again, visit goldathletics.com today. All right. So we're going to start here in Massachusetts, and obviously we got a big one here in the MIAA this weekend, and that, of course, is going to be St. John's Prep visiting Catholic Memorial, which should be a huge game. It is every year, big Catholic conference tilt, Tyler. And look, for me, when I look at this matchup, St. John's Prep beat CM last year 19-7 in a tight game up in Danvers. Obviously, Catholic Memorial has bounced back nicely from a tough season last year, an injury-riddled season for the Knights, but they have bounced back nicely, explosive on offense. They've got some playmaking ability on defense. We've seen that in recent weeks. This is going to be one hell of a matchup, but for me, I'm looking forward to Chris Vargas versus that CM defense. I think that could be a potential matchup advantage for St. John's Prep. And then on the other side of the ball, I think the big question is, can the Prep control the line of scrimmage and slow down this high-powered CM offense?
Yeah, if there's one team that's sort of had CM's number since John DiBiase took over, it is St. John's Prep. Of course, they beat them in consecutive state championship games in 18 and 19. You mentioned the regular season game last year. So St. John's Prep has sort of had CM's number recently. And I think I think in my opinion, this is the best game in Massachusetts and probably in New England this year. A lot of talent on the field. We know about CM and their 4 BC commits. On the other side, you got Vargas at St. John's Prep, Merrick Barlow, the Navy commit, 2 really talented teams. I think you're right. It is going to kind of come down to who wins the trenches. Can CM compete with Prep in the trenches? I think that'll be the major storyline in this game. CM secondary is very good, but they're young. Like Jackson Tucker, Jaden Jackson, these guys are young sophomores, and they're going to be a lot on their plate. And nobody's been able to slow down Vargas to Barlow this year. So we'll see if they're able to slow that down at all. I saw CM play against New Bedford, and you could just kind of see that they have a lot of talented pieces there. I think the key in this game, though, other than the line of scrimmage, is going to be Makai Dodd. How many touches does he get in this game? He only needs about 7 touches to, eclipse 100 yards and score a couple times. So I think if CM commits to him and he gets 15 to 20 touches, I think CM wins this game. Ultimately, I kind of see the game unfolding that way. Dodd touches the ball about 15 times. He's over or around 150 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think he makes a difference. Going to be a fun game, though. I like the Knights by a touchdown.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun game, and I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair as well. I'm going to go with St. John's Prep. I think that they're the one team that can beat this CM team. I think that CM secondary has proven to be vulnerable at times this season. And I think that connection you mentioned of Merrick Barlow and Vargas, I think they click early. I think it's a high-scoring game, but I think ultimately the Prep pulls it off in a close one. And again, I think the one advantage CM will have is that they are at home. But as I mentioned, I think that this St. John's Prep passing game has been special all year. Vargas is a difference maker. He's going to be a problem for the Catholic Conference the next few years. I think that he gets that statement win under his belt early in his career. All right, next up, we're going to go to the Bay State League. Weymouth at Needham. Really good matchup between two teams on the, what are we calling it these days? The I-95 side of the Bay State League? I don't know. It used to be Herget Carey. This would have been a crossover matchup, but nonetheless, really good Bay State matchup between Mike Donovan's Wildcats and a Needham team that is certainly staking its claim as possibly being the best public school in D1.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this should be a fun one. Like I saw Weymouth play Milton earlier in the year, and they were up by 3 touchdowns on the game. Milton scored a couple touchdowns late, made it interesting. But I was really impressed with Weymouth, and they didn't even have Cam Aida in that game. But the way they play offensively, it's brutal to go against. It's a single wing concept, and they have a bunch of different guys that can handle the ball. Tyler Munchback had 2 long touchdown runs in that game, so he's kind of the lightning to Aida's thunder. So they're really able to run the ball. They're strong on both lines. Weymouth was an impressive team. I think Coach Mike Donovan's arguably the coach of the year favorite right now in Division I. He's really turned this program around, and he's doing big things there. With that said, though, you mentioned Needham, arguably the top public school in the state. I think they're right in that mix with King Philip and Springfield Central. And I think this is sort of Needham's year. Like I think they're going to be a semifinalist in Division I. And I think they're still sort of searching for that statement win. And I think they'll get it here. Aiden Williams and company are just a little too deep. I like the Rockets in this one, but it should be a fun one. I think it'll be pretty low scoring, something like 21-14, but I got the Rockets.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it will be a low scoring game. I'm going to go with Needham here as well. They're at home. This is a more seasoned bunch. This senior class has played a lot of big games the last couple of years. Weymouth is on the come. They're going to be very good for a long time as long as Coach Donovan is there. I think that this would be a big opportunity for them to make a statement, but I do think ultimately Needham's experience proves to be the difference here in a tight game. Next up, we're going to stay in the Bay State League, and we got Wellesley at Natick. Really, really good Route 27, Route 9 rivalry, whatever we want to call this one. But these two have always played good games against each other through the years. You've got Walpole, Wellesley, Natick, Walpole, Natick, Wellesley. These schools have always had tight games through the years in the Bay State League, and this one should be no different.
Yeah, I think every week there's one game on our list of the preview and that I really struggle with, and this was the top one this week. I think Wellesley in Division II, Natick in Division I are kind of sneaky teams that they could win a game or two in November. Again, I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, kind of a slugfest sort of game. Ultimately, I like Natick here. I think it's going to be something like 17-14. I just lean Natick. I like the way they're playing right now.
Yeah, Wellesley's an interesting team because they're not being talked about enough in Division II, and they could be a factor in D2 come playoff time in a couple weeks. They could surprise somebody. But certainly, I think when you look at this game, Natick's physicality is very understated, that they're a very physical football team. I've talked to people that have told me that they can be tough to match up against up front, and they're patient offensively, and they lean on you. I think this Wellesley team wants to spread you out, get one-on-one matchup, make some big plays both in the run and in the pass game. But I think if Natick can slow down the pace and play the game at their speed, I think that proves to be the difference. They're at home. Natick, I've coached there for years. They always play well at home. They tend to also get a couple of calls here and there. I mean, I have to throw it out there. Bitter me. But nonetheless, I think this is going to be a terrific matchup. Close game, but I'm with you. I'm going with Natick as well. And as far as getting calls, I'm just disgruntled over one call. So in any event, Mark Mortarelli and his staff do an awesome job. Mort's a great coach. They do a great job there. All right, next up, we're going to go to the Hockomock League for another traditional rivalry game. Two of the old Big Three when Mansfield visits North Attleboro in a huge Davenport division tilt.
It's a huge game, not just for the Davenport, but for Division III and Division III seeding. Right now, they're second and third in the latest MIAA power rankings, which came out yesterday morning. I saw North play against Taunton. They dominated that game, won by 5 touchdowns or so. And then I think that loss to Canton, I think it surprised a lot of people. But I think North, in my eyes, they're probably still the favorite in Division III. I think they're very sound defensively. I think they're able to really run the ball. They have a strong offensive line. They could really lean on teams with that running game, led by Ryan Bannon. And then of course Chase Rasoli too, a 4-year starter. He's seen it all. He's played in plenty of big games. He's in a state championship game as a freshman. I think this is going to be an awesome matchup, and I lean North. Something like 24-21, but it should be a hell of a battle.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great game. These two always play great games. I've coached against both schools. I've covered this matchup. They always play tight games. Mansfield is a team in Division III that I think a lot of people are going to forget about. I don't know how you would do that, even though they're on the youngish side. You still have Mike Redding there, one of the best coaches in state history. You have a program with a lot of tradition. You can't sleep on them. I think they'll be a factor. It's hard for me to pick this game. Like you talk about all the time, there's that one matchup every week when we do the show where we kind of go back and forth as to who we want to pick. This is that game for me because that Canton loss kind of scares me with North a little bit here. I mean, granted, it was a 1-point loss. They play really good D. They can run the ball. Game could have gone either way. But I'm going to go North here. But if you said to me, come Friday night at 10 o'clock that Mansfield won, if I wasn't looking for scores or getting scores, then I'd be like, yeah, I believe you. I think it's going to be a close game. I agree with you, but I'm going to go North here. They are at home. They tend to win these types of games in the past, and I think that this will be another one of those games. I'm going to lean North on that one. We're going to stay in the Hawk next up. We have King Philip at Milford. At the beginning of the year, this matchup had a lot more shine than it does now. Milford has struggled at times this season, but it's still Milford. And this is a circle game for them. They circle the KP matchup on a year-to-year basis. Big game for them. Scarlet Hawks need that signature win to get their season going. I still think they're a team that could potentially be a factor in D3 once we get into the playoffs. KP coming into this one at 6-0. It's interesting because when you look at KP, you could say they haven't been tested yet. But I also don't think that they've played their best football yet either. So I think you can look at it from two different perspectives. Should be a really good game like it is every year. This is another one of those matchups like Mansfield North that's usually close.
Yeah, Milford's a funny team. Like I think they're sort of playing below their standard, below their expectation so far this year. They've played a pretty challenging schedule, so I applaud them for that. But it's just we're used to kind of seeing them pull out these close games, which they've lost this year. And KP is KP. KP is sort of the standard, or among the standards in among public schools in Massachusetts right now, along with like Springfield Central and Duxbury. So I think KP keeps it going. That'll make 20 in a row, right? They'll be win number 20 in a row.
If they win, it'll be 20 in a row.
Yeah. Right. So I think they extend that winning streak to 20. I just think there's too much depth on the KP side. We've talked about this, you, me, and Adam Kirchin. We've talked about how Milford's numbers are a bit down this year. I think that's sort of taking a toll in some of these close games where they just might not have the depth that they're accustomed to having, and that's taking a toll on them. So I could see that being the case again here. We know KP's going to run the ball, play great defense. This KP team is tough. I think it will be competitive though, just given the state of the rivalry in these two programs. But I ultimately lean KP by 10-14.
All right, next up, we're going to go to the Catholic Conference where Malden Catholic visits Xaverian. Xaverian looking to bounce back after 2 straight losses to CM and a surprising loss last week to BC High. Malden Catholic got off to a good start, ended up losing to BC High 2 weeks ago, looking to bounce back after that one. Joe Gaffer's done a really good job there with that Malden Catholic program. They're back to being competitive, and it feels like a program that once again can play in the Catholic Conference and be competitive. I think at the beginning of the year, if you looked at this matchup, obviously you favored Xaverian at home with that defensive line, some of that returning skill, namely Vincent Busa, Will Wood at quarterback. But it's been a struggle. Busa's been out. He got hurt in the CM game. They clearly miss him. They clearly missed him last week. But this Xaverian team needs to bounce back here because now all of a sudden they're 3-3. If they get upset for a second week in a row, they fall to 3-4. Now all of a sudden it could be a struggle for them to make the playoffs. And even if they do, how long do they go? This is a surprising turn of events here for this Xaverian program. I don't think any of us thought through 6 weeks they'd be 3-3, but nonetheless, here they are. Thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I mean it's been a brutal schedule. Like going into the year, I probably would have predicted 4-2 with like losses to CM and Central. I definitely didn't see the BC High game coming. Like I think I underestimated BC High, where I thought Xavier would be able to get it done with or without Busa. Obviously, that's not the case. Busa is a great player. He's one of the best, if not the best, two-way player in the state right now. So I think they still have a ton of talent, right? And I think they're still the more talented team than Malden Catholic. Malden Catholic's very good, but I think kind of after that 4-0 start, they turned a lot of heads, and rightfully so. They're heading in the right direction, but then they kind of got into that gauntlet slate of the Catholic Conference play where they played BC High, then they played Prep, then they got Zavarian, and then they got CM. So it's just a brutal stretch of games. They'll be battle tested come D4. Nobody in D4 plays that sort of schedule. So they'll be ready come playoff time, I think, for sure. I think ultimately, though, Zavarian's just too big, too strong, and too talented. I like the Hawks.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's the difference. I think they bounce back and pick up a big win. You talked about Malden Catholic, start the year off 4-0, competitive game against BC High. They hung in there and played tough last week against the Prep 2, but ultimately Prep too strong for them. They got Zavarian this week, and they close out the regular season with CM next week. I mean, look, you want to be – I hate to say it because we talk about this all the time. There's no moral victories in football. But if you coach Gaff and that staff, you just want your team to be competitive. Remember, you're rebuilding this program. You want to get them to a place where they can be a player in the Catholic Conference. You just want them to be competitive. I think if they can place Zavarian tough here, hang around, make it a game, position themselves to possibly be in it in the fourth quarter, I think you take it. But ultimately, I'm going with the X. All right, next up, we're going to the Dual County League. We got Wayland at Bedford. Wayland is sort of underrated, and they're kind of a hard team to figure out, too, at times. I mean, they've played well this year at times, and then they had that bad loss to Shawsheen. Bedford's been a pleasant surprise, beat Canton earlier this year, who, of course, beat North Attleboro. Should be a pretty good game between two programs that are well-coached and have some good talent.
Yeah, I think this will be a fun game. They had that common opponent in Shawsheen, a very good, like clear top 20 team in the state in Shawsheen. Wayland was blanked in that game. Bedford also lost by 2 scores to that team. So I think it's really tough to take away too much from that common opponent there. I think ultimately, though, I'm leaning Wayland here. I think it's going to be a super fun, super competitive game, something like 28-24. Ultimately, I think Bucknell commit Max Dreesens makes a couple plays, and he's the difference in this one. But Bedford, they're going to be a scary team here come playoff time. Over the last 2 games, I mean, Acton Boxborough and Newton South aren't going to be playoff teams this year, but they've outscored them 111-0 over the last 2 weeks. So that should turn your head there.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I'm with you. I agree. I'm going to go with Wayland as well. I think it should be a pretty good game. But I think Dreesens, he gives them an advantage. He's one of the best players in the state. I think he proves to be the difference. I like Wayland in that one as well. All right, next up, we're going to go up to the MVC. We have Central Catholic at Andover, an old school MVC matchup between 2 Division I programs. Should be a lot of fun, as it is all the time. Both teams under the game at 3-3. Big game for both teams. They need this one to position themselves to not only qualify for the playoffs, but to potentially get a higher seed. A lot at stake here, in which should be a really good game.
It should be a really good game. They've played some great games in the past. I wish it was still a Thanksgiving Day matchup. Central, listen, like they're on the young side. They have a lot of returning pieces, but they also have a lot of experience. They played more freshmen than they used to last year. I think they started 3 or 4 freshmen, and some sophomores sprinkled in as well. So I think I think they probably play the hardest schedule in the state this year. It's been a brutal slate for them. So they're 100% going to be ready for whoever they face, and they're not going to be afraid of whoever they face in any round of the Division I playoffs. Andover's been kind of up and down. We've seen some glimpses out of them. We know they're going to be able to move the ball and score points. I think it's going to be a pretty high scoring game, but ultimately I like Central Catholic in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Central Catholic as well. I agree with you. I think it is going to be a high scoring affair, but that young talent at Central Catholic is really starting to come along. And I think that this ends up being a signature win for them. I'm just not sure Andover has enough offensively if this does in fact become a shootout that they can keep up. You are watching the high school preview show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Saranitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Amaral, and I just want to remind you that Gold Athletics is your one-stop shop for fundraising. They have recently expanded into Maine and New Hampshire with Blaze and Jeff Whitman. They are ready to support even more programs across New England. Whether you're in football or any other sport, reach out to Gold Athletics and they'll make your program raise more money. They'll raise the money, as they like to say, at Gold Athletics. Visit goldathletics.com today for more information. And I've gotten to know Matt Ross here through the years, and when I say he's the best in the business, I really mean it. I'm not saying it simply because they're one of our sponsors, but the reality is pretty much every program I know now in Eastern Massachusetts and other parts of the region use Gold Athletics. I mean, they have a bevy of programs that you can get into to raise money for your school or your program. So like I said, visit goldathletics.com today. All right, next up, we're going to stay in the MVC, Tyler. We have Methuen at Tewksbury. Big game here between the big side and the small side in the MVC.
Yeah, I think honestly, like one of the more surprising results of the season is not that Methuen beat Billerica, but that they shut them out. But Methuen's really known for their offense. Billerica, of course, had been on a tear offensively. And then for them to go in there and win 25-0, that was really surprising in my eyes. I didn't think they were going to be able to really contain that Billerica offense the way they did. Listen, we know about Eason. We know about the offense. But if this defense is going to turn a corner, the Rangers are going to be a serious factor in Division I. I'm going with Methuen in this one. I think it's going to be a pretty competitive game. Ultimately, maybe a one-score game, maybe a 10-point game, something like that. But I've got the Rangers. But I think, this year's a little different. I think the most years, like there's some divisions obviously have clear-cut favorites, but not every division does. And so like Division 4, for example, like in the past, Duxbury, it's kind of been the clear team to beat, right? But this year you got a team like Tewksbury with a pretty explosive offense. We know they're going to play defense, but they got Emeka Olu and Manny Mangata on offense. So they can really score some points. So you got Tewksbury, Grafton, Scituate, Duxbury, Malden Catholic. This is going to be a really fun race. And games like this is really going to have the Redmen ready.
Yeah, I agree. I think D4 is going to be fantastic come playoff time. I'm going to go with Methuen as well. I think obviously Shane Eason, that offense, they're one of the best offenses in the state. But if that defense plays at the level they did last week against that potent Billerica offense, I think Methuen is another public school to watch in Division I along with Springfield Central and Needham. Next up, we have Arlington at Winchester.
I think Winchester's another sort of forgotten team here. They're just kind of handling their business. They had a nice win over Masconomet earlier in the year. I think they're going to keep plugging away here and get this win. I think this is sort of like another one. We talked about those Bay State games where they were low scoring. This Middlesex matchup here, I think this is going to be low scoring as well. 20-14, something in that range, but I like Winchester.
I like Winchester too. Another team in Division II that I don't think people are talking about enough. Of course, they had a great game with Reading. This is a team that I think come playoff time is another team that could win a round and push somebody in the second round. So we shall see. All right, next up we have a D8 matchup here between Tech Boston and Randolph. Tech Boston visiting Randolph. Tech Boston is arguably the best team in Boston this season. Randolph, strong favorite in D8, only one loss to Mashpee. Should be a pretty good game, but Randolph has looked good this season.
Randolph's very good, and so I was a little concerned where Nathaniel Gomes was one of the better running backs in the state, regardless of division, and he was putting up huge numbers for this Randolph team. And then he went down for the season, early first quarter against Mashpee. He was lost for that game, and then eventually ruled out for the entire season. But this offense hasn't missed a beat. They put up over 60 on Hull. They beat a very good Carver team, a game that I thought was like a true toss-up. They beat them by 4 scores last week. So this running game, again, Makai White, he's kind of taking the reins there as the top back. You also got Abe Cornett, multi-year starter at quarterback, Haggai Joseph in the backfield as well. They're big on the line too, especially for a D8 team. They're big on the line. I think Randolph wins this one. These teams could see each other again, as you mentioned, in the D8 playoffs, but I think right now it's kind of Randolph West Boylston as the two favorites in Division 8. I think Randolph wins this one by multiple scores.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Randolph as well. I think Coach Marshall has another strong team there. I think they're going to be really good. You mentioned the talent. You lose a guy like Gomes, but you have two or three other backs step up and fill that void. And they're big and physical up front, and they ball control you. They have multiple backs touching the ball in their wing T system, and then they're able to lean on people as well. So they can play a power game, but they can get to the perimeter as well. They're going to be tough to defend. They are truly one of the favorites in D8. Next up, we're going to go to Central Mass for a big Central Mass matchup, Shrewsbury at Leominster.
Yeah, this is always a big one. I think both teams circle this game on their calendar every year. But listen, Osiris Lopez in that offense, they're clicking right now. They're another team that put up over 60 recently, as they put up over 60 on a good Wachusett team last week. They're sort of becoming like a must-see team in there in Central Mass, and I think Leominster, they get it done offensively again. I expect them to go over 40 again as they kind of gear up here for the playoff run.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Leominster here as well. And Shrewsbury's played a really good schedule, so they are battle-tested. I think they can play Leominster close, but I think this Leominster team is really talented. Another team that could be a public school factor in Division I come playoff time. We're going to stay in Central Mass with our next matchup, and it's a potential D7 title contender matchup, Uxbridge at Millbury.
Yeah, I think Millbury's sort of like a forgotten team here. Like, honestly, in Division 7, I think the top three teams are all Central Mass teams. And Uxbridge, they lost some pieces from last year, but I think it was a little underrated how much they had returning. And I'm definitely guilty of kind of underrating the returning pieces. And I think in my eyes, they're the clear favorite in Division 7 right now to repeat in Division 7. But I think Northbridge and Millbury are in the conversation as well. This could be a very good game, very physical game. Millbury has a very good defense. So I think this will be a good game. Again, like, I wouldn't be at all surprised if in a little over a month from now, this is the matchup at Gillette for the D7 state championship. But ultimately, Uxbridge has that big game experience. I think that's going to matter in this game. I like the Spartans.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Uxbridge as well. Next up, we have Masco at Marblehead.
So after 2 weeks in the season, like, this was like clearly Masco, but Marblehead lost to Fenwick by 19, and they were really beat up by KP. But since then, this team's playing good football. They're really playing good defensively. I really like the way they're playing. They're another team that can be kind of in this Division 4 mix here. Masco, I think, has turned a lot of heads this year, too. This is a program that has a lot of tradition, a lot of pride. They've kind of been not where they were like accustomed to be, like the 2000s and 2010s. So I think they're sort of turning that corner, getting back to that. They had a state win earlier in the year against Billerica. So I think Masco's a pretty good team here. I like the way Marblehead's playing right now, though, especially on defense. 17-14 Magicians.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Marblehead as well. I mean, they have really turned things around since that week 2 matchup against KP. They're 4-2. I mean, Jim Rudloff, that staff, they do a great job. They're a program that you can't sleep on in the playoffs as well. They could be a potential factor. So I think that not that they need a signature win, but I think Masco, they're back. They're a lot more competitive than they were a couple of years back. But I think ultimately Marblehead is slightly better. I'm going to go with the Magicians as well. Next up, we have Burlington at Stoneham.
This is going to be a fun one. I mean, Burlington, they're kind of maybe the most surprising undefeated team in the state right now at this point. I think the Red Devils are going to be in the mix in the playoffs, and this is going to be a competitive game. But ultimately, Stoneham's kind of part of this mix of Division 6 teams, and what I think is the most loaded and competitive division in the state. Stoneham, that double wing offense, we talk about that all the time. Bob Almeida, they run it perfectly. I run the double wing system perfectly. They've got big, strong kids. Sean Kilty and Matthew Tran have really, made great strides this year. Ultimately, I like the Spartans here, and I think they're a legitimate player in Division 6.
I agree with you, and that offense makes them tough to stop. And we know what kind of a coach Almeida is. He's been around a long time. He's run that double wing offense well for a long time. They're also a program that's played a good schedule. They'll be battle tested come playoff time. I agree that there'll be a factor in D6. And I think that Burlington could be a factor in D4. So we'll see. But nonetheless, I'm with you. I'm going with Stoneham here, which should be a pretty good game, a 28-21 kind of game. Next up, Scituate at Norwell.
I think Sandwich at Norwell.
Sandwich at Norwell. What did I say?
Yeah.
Situate? No.
Situate,
They
yeah.
played earlier this year. I
They did play
apologize.
earlier this year, yeah.
Sandwich at Norwell.
Yeah, Sandwich, I think, like Adam said this earlier in the year, he saw them play against Plymouth North, and he was like, Sandwich is going to be another team here in D6 to throw into the mix. And he was definitely right about that. This team's playing good football. They had a really impressive win over East Bridgewater last week. This is another team that runs double wing really to perfection. Bob Lump, he did it at Apponequet. He did it at Wareham. He's doing it at Sandwich now. All that guy does is win.
Yeah, he just keeps making his way south.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
What's his final destination going to be? Nauset someday?
It must be Nauset, yeah. Nauset or Cape Tech.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Or Upper Cape Tech. Yep.
But yeah, he's a great coach. I like the way I like the direction the Sandwich program is heading in. Ultimately, though, Norwell, had some injuries earlier in the year at quarterback. They were down to like third string quarterback at one point. They really got beat up by Scituate. I think it was 41-7. They're not going to see another team as good as Scituate this year, though, so they're going to be a factor in D6. Ultimately, I like the Clippers here on their home turf.
Yeah, I like the Clippers here as well. I mean, I think you're right. I think Sandwich has had a really good year. They could be another team that makes some noise in the D6 playoffs in a couple of weeks. But Norwell, coming into the season, there were high expectations for the Clippers. I still think that they're a team that has the talent to where they can be competitive come playoff time. I'm going to go with Norwell here as well. Next up, we're going to go to Cohasset at Mashpee in another really good South Shore Cape matchup.
These South Shore games are awesome. I mean, it's in my opinion, it's the best South Shore league, best small school league in the state. On both sides, you really get some really competitive matchups. I think, again, we mentioned Uxbridge and Millbury, two teams that could play again. Cohasset and Mashpee could very well play again, and that's a game that could be played at Gillette. Realistically, those are two great programs, as we know. I think Mashpee's the favorite here. Not just because they're at home, but they've really got some nice pieces here. Ben Squash is really standing out to this point in the season. I like the Falcons, but as always, this should be a really competitive game.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Falcons as well, but I agree. I think it should be a really good matchup. I mean, of course, Cohasset has Wildfire at quarterback, dual threat kid, so they could certainly keep up and make this game competitive. And we know that Peter Afanasou's a terrific coach. All right, next up we have East Bridgewater at Abington.
Yeah, I think East Bridgewater is another team that's kind of turned heads. Like, I didn't really have them on my radar early in the year, but they just continue to win. Last week, of course, they got kind of beat up by a good Sandwich team. I saw Abington play earlier in the year. They beat Silver Lake. They're a really tough, competitive team. I like what Coach Riley is doing there, kind of continuing that tradition of winning from Coach Kelleher. So I like the Green Wave.
I like the Green Wave as well. East Bridgewater's been a nice story this season. But I think Coach Riley's getting a lot out of that Abington squad, and I think ultimately it'll be a tight game. It'll be a good game, but I'm going to lean Abington here. Next up, we have Dartmouth at Bridgewater Rainham in a pretty intriguing matchup here. Indians, of course, team to keep an eye on in D3, Jackson Hart and company, Ray Gramlich, but they'll have their hands full with an improving BR team.
An improving BR team, and I think we all kind of expected this, right? Like they're a younger team, a little bit inexperienced, but Ian Bain's a great coach. So they lost some games to start the year. Now they're starting to kind of hit their stride a little bit. When you want to be hitting your stride heading into the playoffs, they're kind of a forgotten team in Division II. Maybe they're a team that pulls an upset as a lower seed. I think the Trojans are really going to get things going in the right direction here. But I think at points this year, I've kind of gone back and forth from being maybe overrating Dartmouth to then maybe underrating Dartmouth. Now I think they're kind of starting to settle in as who we thought they were as a Division III contender. Hart, Gramlich, those guys are tough to stop. I like the Indians.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really good matchup. I mean, this is an upset alert game here. If there was going to be a big upset this weekend in Eastern Mass, not a big upset, I don't want to overstate it, but an upset nonetheless, this would be the game. I mean, Ian Bain, man, he can coach. We know how well he can coach the passing game. Trojans are going to be able to throw the ball. This is a tough one for me. I mean, I could go either way here. I'm going to go Dartmouth, but again, one of those scenarios where if you told me on Friday night at 10 o'clock the BR won, I wouldn't be surprised. All right, next up, we have a Daily Transcript matchup here, the old Daily Transcript. Adam Kirchen used to write for the Transcript back in the day. The old Daily Transcript matchup, Westwood at Dedham.
Um, Dedham, I thought honestly, like before the year, I predicted them to be semifinalists in Division 5. They haven't quite lived up to that or my expectations for them. I still think they're a good team though, but the funny thing with them is they're still in search of that third win. They need that third win to qualify for the postseason. So I think it's going to come down to the last week for them. I like Westwood in this one.
Yeah, Westwood got thumped last week by Norwood in a game that I thought was going to be much more competitive than it was. Dedham has struggled. AJ Panett, their star back, is banged up. They're 2-4. They do have a win over Bellingham. But I do think ultimately Westwood is a little bit deeper, and that proves to be the difference here. I think their depth, and I think that they have an edge up front. I think that gives them the edge overall. I like Westwood in this one as well. All right, next up we have Neshoba Tech at KIPP.
Another great small school game and another game that we could see down the road here. These are two really good Division 8 programs. Big game in that Commonwealth Athletic Conference. Ultimately, though, I love the way the Vikings are playing. Coach Danny Kelly's really got it going on. That offense has been really potent, one of the better offenses in the small school divisions. You talk about guys like Chase Carney at receiver, Colby Catterton at quarterback. They've got some nice pieces there. I lean Vikings here, but I think this is a true toss-up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a toss-up as well. I mean, when I look at this matchup, I do think that both teams are going to score a lot of points. I'm going to go KIPP here, but here I go again, another one of those games where if you told me on Friday night that Neshoba Tech won, I would be like, yeah, okay. Next up, we have LaSalle at Barnstable in one of the bigger interstate matchups of the weekend. Should be a pretty good game. Of course, Barnstable has played one of the toughest schedules in Massachusetts, hosting a good LaSalle team that's going to be a factor come playoff time in Rhode Island. LaSalle has turned things around, coming off a big win over St. Ray's.
Yeah, so like Barnstable, their defense had been playing really well. Like their defense was lights out until about the 10-minute mark in the fourth quarter against Hendricken. And then Hendricken scored 21, and then they really couldn't stop Dartmouth. So I'm wondering if Hendricken kind of laid out the blueprint for the rest of the teams to maybe expose some things in that Barnstable secondary on that Barnstable defense. Ultimately, I think I lean LaSalle here. Like I think it's going to be a competitive game. I still thought Barnstable was an impressive team. Last week was just a little strange to me that they kind of got dominated by Dartmouth. I think LaSalle goes on the road and gets a nice win here.
Yeah, Jeff Marcone's Rams play one of the toughest schedules in Rhode Island and in New England, arguably the toughest schedule in Rhode Island, although Hendricken can also lay claim to that. But they're starting to play their best football. Samuel Perry at quarterback, he's young. He's starting to get comfortable in that offense. And one thing about LaSalle is they have skill guys, and they have guys that can make big plays. And if they can get their skill guys going, get that running game going, I think that they're going to be in pretty good shape here. I'm going to go with LaSalle as well. I'm not necessarily saying that I think Barnstable is going to collapse. I certainly think that they could be a team to watch in D2 come playoff time, but LaSalle, I think, is clicking on all cylinders at the right time. All right, we're going to go to the ISL Large for a couple of key matchups here. First up, we have Belmont Hill at Tabor. Should be a really good game. Big game here, of course. Tabor, BB&N next weekend. That's the big one, and it could be for all the marbles. But Belmont Hill is in the mix here, and Anthony Fucillo's squad might have something to say about it. This should be a fantastic game between two talented teams with a lot of Division I caliber talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a ton of talent on the field. I think it is going to be a great game, very competitive game. I wonder if this is sort of a trap game for Tabor looking ahead to BB&N. Ultimately, though, I think Tabor just has too many weapons. We've talked about this in the past. They've got so many pieces on that offense. They're going to be able to put up points regardless of the opponent. So I think the Seawolves get it done here.
Yeah, I agree. Next up, we have Phillips Exeter at Brunswick, and what could be the game of – it's certainly the NEPSAC game of the year as it's shaping up right now, and it could be the game of the weekend in New England. Fantastic matchup here between two undefeated programs. Brunswick, of course, led by Notre Dame commit Blake Hebert at quarterback. You've got a good offensive line, good skill group, but they're taking on a Phillips Exeter team that is also very talented. Panos Vulgatis has done a great job there. They've been steamrolling everybody. This is going to be a fascinating matchup.
It is, and I think it's a little bit of an upset, but I'm going Phillips Exeter here. I think they're kind of flying under the radar a little bit, not getting quite as much love and as much hype as some of these other prep schools around New England. I like Phillips Exeter. It's going to be a good game, though.
I'm going to go with Brunswick. I think Phillips Exeter is really good, but I think Brunswick has played a little bit of a stronger schedule. I think that they're a little bit more of an experienced team. I also think that they have a little bit more big play potential. I think it's going to be a fun game. Could be a high-scoring game, but I'm leaning Bruins in this one. I'm going to go with Brunswick. Next up, we go down to Connecticut. One of the top games of the weekend there is Darien at Ludlow. Should be a pretty good game. Darien's only lost to Windsor, who is currently the number one state in Connecticut in our top 25 poll. Ludlow's coming in at 4-1. Darien, surprise loss to Windsor, but they're starting to get back into form here. They're going to be a player in Class L come playoff time.
They are, yeah. I mean, Windsor is one of the better, like you said, the number one in our poll in Connecticut, and rightfully so. But I still think Darien is a top 5-ish team in Connecticut right now. So ultimately, I lean Darien. I think this is going to be a good game. Probably the best of the slate in Connecticut this week, but ultimately I go Darien.
I'm going to go Darien too, and I'm with you. They are a top 5 team. Like I said, it's probably going to come down to them in UConn and in Class L. Of course, they play on Thanksgiving, but it should be a terrific game nonetheless. All right, our next stop is going to be up in Maine, where Bonnie Eagle visits Noble. Bonnie Eagle, of course, has 2 losses, but they're the only team to beat Portland. A Portland team, by the way, who beat Thornton Academy last weekend. So this should be a fascinating matchup between an established program like Bonnie Eagle and a program in Noble that's been really good in recent years.
I think there's like a real case that these two teams, in addition to Portland and Thornton Academy, are kind of that top 4, that top tier of teams in Maine. I think this is another one where it's like really a true toss-up. I'm going to give Noble the edge here on their home field.
Yeah, Bonnie Eagle has been very up and down. They're very hard to figure out. That they're certainly talented and good enough that they can be a contender in Class A in Maine and make some noise, but they're a hard team to figure out. And is it going to be the team that beat Portland that shows up, or is it a team that struggles against teams that they're better than? We shall see. I'm leaning Noble in that one as well. All right, our next stop is the Granite State, where Nashua South is going to attempt to slay the monster that is Bedford. Bulldogs have been rolling. They've got their sights squarely on a three-peat here. Zach Matthews' squad has been terrific all season long. Newton South's going to have their hands full.
They are going to have their hands full. I think Nashua South, they've been really rolling teams, including Lowell, Mass. They've kind of been dominating teams here in New Hampshire as well. I just don't think – well, I know they haven't seen a team as good as Bedford. I think Bedford probably is the favorite in New Hampshire. I think they will get that three-peat as of right now.
Yeah.
And I think they will get that three-peat this year. They're just the class of the state. I don't really know what else to say. That defense is very good. I think they have a nice offense to complement it. I like the Bulldogs here.
Yeah, they are the class of the Granite State, and I'm with you. I mean, look, they came from behind to beat Pinkerton a couple weeks ago. They've beaten Londonderry. I mean, sure, those programs are good enough come playoff time that in a one-game single elimination format, obviously, they can game plan, and if they play well and Bedford doesn't, they could pull off the upset. But Bedford is on track to get that three-peat. It's going to be hard to see anybody beating them the rest of the way. And finally, probably the top interstate matchup of the weekend, and our Craig Boland is going to be there for that one on Saturday. Bishop Hendricken at Fairfield Prep. Of course, Hendricken a couple weeks ago played at Greenwich, lost 21-20 in a great game. MJ D'Angelo scored 3 touchdowns in that game for Greenwich. This should be a fantastic matchup between a Hendricken team that's got their mojo now. Now they're rolling, and against a Fairfield Prep team that returns a lot of seniors and is a talented team trying to position themselves to potentially be a factor in the Class LL playoffs.
This should be a fun one. And Hendricken, these road, it's not even just the non-conference schedule and these out-of-state games, but they're almost all on the road too. They had to go to Greenwich, they went to Barnstable, now they're going to Fairfield Prep. So, they're making a lot of long bus rides here. I think they're certainly gonna be battle tested come playoff time in Rhode Island. You said they kind of have their mojo going now. I think that's correct. I like the way the Hawks are playing. I think that win against Barnstable, I really do think that was a kind of a springboard signature type win where it was just really gutsy, like a championship effort where you're down, not much is going right for you, and then you rattle off 21 unanswered in the final 10 minutes against a good program. So that was really eye opening to me. I love what Coach Croft does there at Hendricken. I think they go on the road again and pick up another big win.
Yeah, this one's a hard one for me because I agree with you in a sense that I think that they certainly have the pieces that it takes to go on the road and win a game like this. But that Fairfield prep team is really good, and I think they're really talented as well. I'm going to go Hendricken here, but I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, but a close game. I can see this being a 28-21 kind of game, but I am leaning Hendricken. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of the High School Preview Show. And before we go, I do want to thank our sponsor, Gold Athletics. And I do want to say one thing. Tournament Management Committee today voted down the latest football proposal, the supposed Connecticut plan, as it was initially called. It was shot down by a margin of 16-1, which, look, I'm a proponent of the plan. I've been a supporter of it. New England Football Journal has been a supporter of it. We're supporters of it because we think it's the best plan for high school football in Massachusetts. And I know I spoke to several Division I coaches who didn't agree with me. I spoke to several coaches on Western Mass who didn't agree with us either. And we respectfully, we respect you and your opinions, and we see where you're coming from, and we understand what you're saying. We just thought ultimately it was the right plan for Massachusetts high school football. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. So with that being the case, this is the system that we have in place. I don't think that this system is effective, in my opinion, Tyler. I've said that all along. I think 16 playoff teams per division is way too many. I don't like that we're playing our playoffs during the regular season. I think that is silly. I think that the people out there that want to see Thanksgiving go away, I don't think they're out of touch with high school football in the region, especially in Massachusetts. I think that day still has a lot of meaning to a lot of communities. I think ultimately this was a chance to do right by the game. And I know that people are going to think you're being selfish because you're a football guy. And what about the winter sports and all this other stuff? I get it. But I think at the end of the day, it was barely going to affect those sports and that season. So that's not an argument against it, in my opinion. I think that this was a golden opportunity to do the right thing, and they dropped the ball.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of the quote unquote Connecticut plan. I think it would be the best format. I think the 11 game sample size would accurately, in most cases, give us the top 8 teams in each division, which would set up for some really exciting playoff matchups across the board in all divisions. And then as far as like the winter and spring sports go, like I was talking to my friend who's a baseball coach today, and it's like in Massachusetts, we're starting baseball with snow on the ground. Like there's no need for the winter and spring sports to start when they do. They could easily push back a week, even 2 weeks in the case of spring sports. So I still really understand it from that perspective and why winter and spring coaches get so bent out of shape and think that, I don't know. I just don't know. They have like something against football. I guess it seems like they're already mad that football goes into December. It's the only sport that goes into December, and then adding another week on top of that, it's just it feels like it's never going to get done here.
Yeah, like I said, I just think that that would be a small percentage of schools that would be impacted by the second week of December and then playing the championship games. I think the whole thing is silly. I don't think, and unfortunately, I think a lot of these other sports coaches, they'll complain that we get everything. They'll complain that it's favoritism. Football always gets everything, and I think that that's just silly. I don't think that the sport of football gets anything more than any other sport does. I just think the bottom line is, I think what ultimately ended up being the difference here is the football community wasn't on the same page on this, and until the football community gets on the same page, you're not going to have a sensible format that's good for the game and beneficial. And if you're going to sit there and tell me that it's a numbers issue and it's too long a season, please stop. No, it is not. If a program is a small program, that has number issues. If they're winning, the kids will stay and play. If they're not winning, then the coach may have a hard time keeping the team interested. The bottom line is, for the majority of schools, the season would still end on Thanksgiving. So this idea about numbers and how it could affect programs playing it deeper into December, I think that that's a load of gibberish. And I think that that's an excuse. I don't buy it. I never have. The bottom line is we supported the plan. It didn't happen. So we will go with what we know, which is the current format. All right, Tyler. Great stuff as always, brother. You truly are the best in the business, in my opinion. Appreciate you as always, and we'll talk to you next week. All right, Ryan Battery will be joining me next for the college football preview show. For Tyler Amaral, I'm John Serenino.